Hello, and welcome to the Frankenpod, a podcast stitched together from the corpses of mystery, noir, and gothic literature and cinema. I'm Morgan, and today we're looking at everyone's favourite vampire, Count Dracula. Well, he might be everyone's favourite vampire. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not really into vampires. So, I have enlisted some help from someone who is quite into Dracula. Dracula is one of those monsters who is pervasive and terrifying. I've already explored how he's being contorted and manipulated to fit our social anxieties. Despite the very of their time nature of Dracula adaptations, the appeal of certain adaptations is divisive. The novel Dracula has a timeless appeal, and that might not be entirely the case for the movies. The 1931 movie has an enduring quality, but it has visibly aged and lost its edge. The 1992 movie is narratively compelling, but the effects and augmentation of the original text place it firmly in the 90s. I asked a fellow Australian podcaster, Sarah from Good Nightmare, to tell me why the novel is such a favourite of hers.
Hello everyone, I'm Sarah from Good Nightmare, and I am so excited to have been invited to share my experience with Dracula on the Frankenpod. Dracula is one of those go-to books that I will recommend to anyone when they ask me about any kind of book that they should read, whether they're asking for a classic, something with a bit of fantasy, something that has interesting relationships, or they just can't think of what to read next. I will always put my hand up and say, Dracula, you need to read Dracula. I was about 23, I would say, when I first read the novel, which was actually a late start for me, given that I studied literature all throughout high school and university. I was working a reception job that wasn't exactly taxing and left me with a bit of spare time. So I thought, you know what, let me just grab this book and see how I go. I hadn't had the best experiences with many classic literature books before. So Jane Austen I do enjoy, but some of her books I could take or leave. And sadly, I'm not at all a fan of Frankenstein. I do like the monster, but I just didn't really like the story. The concept was a bit more exciting to me than the actual story itself. But with Dracula, I had been hesitant for a long time to read it. I know that I am an Anne Rice fan, so I don't know why I waited so long, given that I love vampire stories. I think they're intriguing and there's so many different takes on them. And the myths, like, are they going to address the myths as they are what they are, or are the myths in this story? Or, you know, there's so many different ways to interpret it. And Dracula was the original vampire. So when I started reading Dracula, I didn't really expect it to have much of an effect on me, but I actually flew through it and really, really enjoyed it. I still have some very vivid imagery that I can recall at basically any time when thinking about the book itself and the story, which is kind of cool. Of course, a lot of it's flowing white gowns and black and white scenes and graveyards and fog and all that sort of thing. So I guess it's a little typical of me to imagine the story in that kind of setting, but it was a lot in that kind of setting. The story didn't really spook me or anything. It kind of drew me into more gothic stories and darker tales and things like that. So after reading Dracula, I actually went and picked up The Exorcist, which was another story that I'd been interested in but hadn't read. I have watched a lot of exorcism stories and documentaries and films and all that sort of thing and really enjoyed them, but I'd never actually picked up one of the books that started the craze. And I finally did, because I was in love with Dracula. I thought, you know what, I'm going to give this one a shot, and I ended up picking it up and I absolutely loved it. So Dracula kind of opened up that world of gothic storytelling to me. I don't really remember the characters in super vivid detail because it has been a few years since I read the novel, but I do remember that I really enjoyed the female characters, and there was one male character that I just could not stand. It wasn't that he was poorly written, it was just him as a person. He came across as kind of, I don't know, you know, that kind of person who's clingy, and you just imagine them with tears always in their eyes, and they're just so needy and just a wimp, I guess. I know that sounds kind of bad, but I wish I could tell you the name. I think it might have been Arthur or something like that, but he was a little bit too needy for me. And I know that comes down to personal preference in characters and in people, but yeah, that's one of the main characters that stood out to me. Surprisingly, or maybe not so surprisingly to anyone that knows me, I haven't actually seen an adaptation of Dracula. Same as with Phantom of the Opera and The Exorcist. I haven't seen any of their adaptations. I did see the very start of one Dracula film, but I was very, very young. So as soon as the blood and guts came on TV, I was kind of scooped out of the room, which is probably fair enough because I was definitely too young for that. I don't really like gory movies as such. I just like a movie with a really good story. So while this did open me up to like more gothic kind of literature, it really hasn't brought the movies to my attention as such. Like I'm not very interested in them still. I still haven't seen The Exorcist, Phantom of the Opera, any Dracula film, anything like that. And I'm not really sure that I want to, because I have such vivid memories of reading the book and really loving how it was playing out in my mind that I don't know that I'd want images from a movie to kind of overtake that experience, if that makes sense. There's something so personal and intimate about reading a story where you can kind of insert yourself into it, like you're there with the characters. And I really felt that with Dracula, and I absolutely loved that reading experience. Even talking about it now kind of has me wanting to go back and reread the story. So I think that I might do that, even just bit by bit throughout the year. I just want to say thank you so much for having me on FrankenPod. This kind of stuff is right up my alley, so it's really exciting when I get a chance to talk about books and literature and creepy stories and things like that. So I'm very thankful to get a chance to share this with you guys and your listeners. If anyone wants to hear more of my voice, you can catch me at Good Nightmare Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you listen to podcasts. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the episode, as I am sure that you will. And I'll catch you around. Bye.
Thanks to Sarah for providing that clip. Good Nightmares is a really great podcast to listen to, especially if you like folklore, suspense, and a little dash of true crime. In order to fully explore Dracula, we would be remiss if we didn't cover the 1931 movie. Fun fact, the Spanish language Dracula was filmed on the same set but at night, so they were able to perfect the shots that the American crew may have botched a little, and may regard the Spanish version as the superior film. I have not watched the Spanish version, but instead watched the American Universal Studios version of Dracula, directed by Carl Laemmle. I'm going to go with Carl Laemmle Jr. and starring Bela Lugosi as the titular count. First of all, we need to talk about bats. The foreboding and creepiness of squeaky bats is completely lost in a time where you can buy similar bats for 50 cents or less after Halloween. And that's in Australia. We don't really have a thriving and culturally entrenched version of Halloween. In fact, the backlash against Halloween is probably as strong as the movement towards it. So if we can get that type of bat, you know it's pretty pervasive in Western culture. And the threat of these vaguely flapping, kind of flying bats on a string is pretty much entirely lost at this point. You can copy and paste this audience response for the gigantic spiders. But the armadillos in the Castle Dracula? The armadillos caught me off guard. I wouldn't call the response fear, rather confusion. The 1931 features a lot of close-ups of Dracula with lights focused intently on Bela Lugosi's intensely creepy eyes. This way of depicting the hypnotic gaze is effective, but more than a tiny bit ridiculous. Also, we never see a bite. We just see people leaning in ominously, and the scene fades or the vampire moves slowly and ominously out of shot. And yes, I'm using the word ominously a lot, and intense a lot. I am sorry, but this is the script I have written, and I am not writing it again because it is Friday morning and I have not had enough coffee.
I begged you to send me away, but you wouldn't. Now it's too late. It's happened again. What's happened?
The movie is as subtle as a brick. But let's face it, you don't come to Universal Studios' monster canon for a nuanced story and multi-dimensional characters. One problem I had with it that I didn't expect, but in hindsight, considering other Dracula narratives, I really should have anticipated this. They have very obviously styled Lucy as the modern woman, almost flapper in style, and carried out some serious 1930s slut-shaming and painted it like she deserved to be bitten, unlike the pure and innocent Mina. Hey everyone, can we have an adaptation of Dracula in which Lucy is not painted as someone who deserved to be killed because she's not as chaste or special than her friend Mina? If there's a version out there that I've missed in which Lucy gets a fair go, please let me know because I would be quite curious to watch it or read it. I've said some quite nasty and judgmental things about the film, but I do really appreciate some of the very special elements that the film brings to the Dracula narrative. The movie gives us an origin story for Renfield, which means we get so much supernaturally crazed Dwight Fry, which I am 100% here for. Helen Chandler's performance is wonderful, over the top, and just beautiful. Obviously, Bela Lugosi as Dracula and Eric Van Sloan as Van Helsing are the most iconic characters in the movie, but Helen Chandler as Mina Harker almost made me like the character of Mina more. And the bushy mustaches of the Transylvanian villagers are something to behold. Honestly, this movie's mustache game may be among the best I've ever seen. An honourable mention has to go to Jonathan's suits. They almost made him interesting.
No, Master. I wasn't going to say anything. I told him nothing.
Things I learnt from the 1931 movie Dracula. Always listen to heavily mustached villagers. Complex scenes with hordes of rats are best conveyed by Dwight Fry talking about them. Flappers immediately get a public autopsy for some reason. And you can't judge a man by his knickerbockers. I find it hard to choose a favourite Dracula because I just don't get him as a monster. Werewolves and Frankenstein's creature I can get, but Dracula is, well, I guess I'm about to use this term. Dracula is extra. I feel like part of me just died. I think it's the overt upper class transgressive sexuality of Dracula that is just a little too confronting for me. I prefer my monsters less deliberate. So if you're into vampires, who's your favourite? Or do you prefer a good vampire hunter? Thank you so much for listening to the Frankenpod this week. Next week, hopefully, we'll have an interview with Alex Roberts. I'm still working on cleaning up some of the audio because Australian internet is terrible. So hopefully you get that interview really soon because she is an incredibly interesting and engaging person who knows an awful lot about female vampire tropes and the way that the female vampire conveys social anxieties. As usual, you can follow us on Twitter at The Frankenpod, and please subscribe to us in your podcast app.
What do we want to do next week?
Oh,
well, not
next month.
week, next month.
I thought we were doing Sin City.
We can do Sin City.
Well, that's what you wanted, and I ordered the damn comic book.
Awesome. I'm excited.
I'm not. This will be the first thing that we've done that won't pass the Rotten Apples test.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry. Thanks for bringing Harvey Weinstein into this podcast, Brent.
Yeah, he's the producer,
Who
wasn't
am I
he?
going to fangirl over on Sin City?
Jessica Alba.
Probably not. Don't even really like Clive Owen.
Josh Hartnett's in it.
He is, but I only liked him since Penny Dreadful. Young Josh Hartnett didn't really do much for me.
He wasn't really young.
Maybe you'll just have to fanboy over Jessica Alba.
Maybe. I only liked her because of Dark Angel. It's that whole dystopia thing.
We're not doing Dark Angel.
Well, if I can link it to Frankenstein. Actually, I totally could. They are an organization who create people.
Fuck off. Ah!
On that note, see you next month.